But I get your point.
Okay, Joe, we've had enough fun. We have to move on to our first panel and discuss a serious topic, the Iranian protests. And make sure you leave your comments on Facebook and Periscope and let us know your thoughts on these headlines.
Now, since December 28th, anti-government protests have swept Iran, with hundreds arrested and 13 dead. The unrest comes from economic hardship and alleged government corruption. On January 3rd, Iran declared the revolutionaries defeated the protesters, which is an interesting way to put it. But reports are protests are still coming in, although they seem to be dying down.
Joining our discussion on this topic is Blair Amani from DoSomething.org and Dr. Wolf von Laer from Students for Liberty. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us.
Thanks for making it in such cold and snowy weather. We appreciate it.
Oh, yes. Well, it was definitely a trek, but glad to be here.
So tell us about what's going on in Iran.
Well, I think that, you know, if we look at America, the way that protests are reported on, and to look at it overseas, we're not going to get the full picture. What we get from the state or what's going to be censored is not going to be the full picture. And so I think that the way it's been diminished into these little talking points about hijab or about the conflict within religious groups is really disingenuous. And so I'd like to speak to folks on the ground, and being that neither of us are Iranian, it's only going to be kind of secondhand narratives.
This seems to be as much of a protest against the government and against living in an Islamic country with very strict rules, but just as much about the economy. In some parts of Iran, there are 60% unemployment. I think the overall number, for at least among young people, and that's primarily people that are protesting, 1 in 4 unemployed. And they want progress because they know there's a lot of oil money, and they think that money is being repurposed for either military reasons, terrorism reasons. Is that the true driving force behind this protest, that this is our economy stinks and you guys got to get your act together?
Yeah, I think that's the primary motivator behind those protests. Of course, every kind of protest will be try to, like other people coming in and trying to have their agenda put on it, but it's really mostly about the economic conditions. And you can see that mostly in the areas where mostly poor people live, those where the protests occurred. And we can see this because the government has been in high debt for many, many decades. They're very centrally planned, and they try to open up the markets, but they don't do it fast enough. And you see there's like now some positive news that you have like more startups coming about, but it doesn't affect really like many of the poor people and not the connected people.
And I'd like to interject, actually. You stated that part of the reason was that they're living in an Islamic country and that's why they're protesting.
That was my next question.
Yeah.
I think we need to distinguish between that, because I think the government claims to speak for Islam and they don't.
I think that a lot of folks claim to speak for Islam and they don't. There's the exactly.
Buddhism,
there's a wonderful saying that Islam is perfect, Muslims are not. But I think it's important to understand that protest is a human response to tyranny and nothing else. And so I think whether that's coming from economic conditions, feeling of oppression, feeling that a religious doctrine has been twisted and manipulated to oppress people, that's something that happens all over the world. And right now we're seeing it in Iran. So I just wanted to clarify there.
Are the mullahs in charge, or is the Iranian president in charge? And when you look back at 2009 in here, or the Revolutionary Guard, right, the guys with the guns in charge. I guess my question is, whenever a protest like this happens, it appears that the government cracks down by killing people. And if you're there, that must be a scary proposition. Like, look, I want my economic conditions to improve, but it won't matter if I'm 6 feet underground. It's really just a tough situation because they're met with such force.
I think speaking from the perspective of being a protester, being a Black Lives Matter protester here in the U.S. and having been arrested in Baton Rouge in 2016, that was definitely the feeling was, am I going to make it out alive?
Why were you arrested?
I was arrested I was standing on private property. We're actually suing because it was an unlawful arrest, we believe. And we were just met with such force. And it's really when there's an uprising, the people with the guns want that protest to be quelled. And so it felt like a life and death moment, but we were just speaking up for our liberties. And so
interesting. So private property, was that somebody's lawn you're on? They said, get off my lawn, like some old guy came out?
No, Lisa Baptiste actually allowed us to be on her lawn, and we were met with ridiculous force, quite frankly. And I think that Baton Rouge is really making great progress in working with the community and working with the police there.
Sure.
So hopefully we'll see good coming out of that horrible situation.
So okay, Dr. Wolf, I have a question for you. You know, this Iran deal right now, Trump wants to get rid of it, and the Europeans do not want to get rid of it. What's the European perspective on the Iran deal that we made?
I mean, first and foremost, I would like to
Wolf
say...
is from Germany, by the way.
Yes,
so
if you would not have guessed as of now.
V. Gates. That's the end of my German.
I try to hide it. I'm not very successful at it, I have to admit. So it's very interesting. So I think generally the European position has been just wait and see for the process in general, which I think was a little bit better than just sending more inflammatory tweets. But I mean, what can you do, right? That's one thing. Generally, I would say that economic sanctions, there's a rich literature on that, never achieve their policy goals. It harmed the people on the ground and it harms the economy. And those are not the reasons why the economy is struggling right now. So I would just say that more economic sanctions will really not benefit that. However, that being said, that you definitely want to pursue this deal that they reduce the atomic program. That is a good way forward, and that should be continued to be pushed.
So what happens next, right? The protests appear to be dying down. Yeah, there could be a couple popping up here and there. So is this just an every 7-year thing that we're going to be seeing? Or how does it become organized to the point where the government is so overwhelmed that the actual change comes?
The economic conditions continue to worsen. I mean, unemployment also specifically bad for females in the country. They have a very high unemployment rate, and you saw many protesters being actually female and standing up for it, which we have not seen recently coming out from Iran all that much. So that is a positive sign. However, it's still highly protectionistic. They have very high tariffs, so people cannot come in and trade with them. That's one of the reasons why they have very high prices.
We can't
for
just blame us for the sanctions, because the Iran deal took off a lot of the sanctions.
I mean,
I think
it's part of the story, but it's not the complete picture, because
I think
they're screwing up the economy themselves.
The inspirational thing that we're seeing out of Iran, if anything, and we're seeing kind of across the world, really, is the young people coming forward. And that's something that I'm really excited that we were talking about earlier, getting to work with young people in my role at Do Something with our new campaign, Grab the Mic. And we're showing young people how to grab the mic and make their voices heard online, in their communities, and at all levels of government.
You're grabbing the mic right now, Blair.
Absolutely. And it's about, seizing these opportunities, making your voice heard, and getting young people involved. So if there are any young people watching that want to get involved, just going to dosomething.org and jumping right in and changing.
I have a button question for you, Blair.
The future.
A lot of people view you and they see a hijab. And, they view Iranians on TV and they see a hijab. And they view that as oppression. How do you deal with that?
Well, my mom felt the same way when I converted to Islam 3 years ago. And so
What were you before that?
Christian.
Really?
Baptist.
Sorry to lose you.
It's all good. It's the same God. It's the same God, I truly feel. But I think that anytime we're reducing something to a piece of clothing, an entire revolution to something that women wear on their head or choose to wear on their head, it just speaks to the fact that we're denying women autonomy. And so when somebody sees me down the street and considers me just a headscarf, that says more about them than it does about me. And I think that's something we should all think about when we're looking at any subject matter, but it's specifically the Iranian protests.
We also have to add to that it's not only the free choice of the people in Iran to wear headscarves or the women, because before the 1970s we all have seen these pictures of
Well, I think anytime the government is telling women what to do or telling people how to feel, that's a problem.
Yes.
And I think anytime a religious doctrine is being twisted to do the same thing, it's a problem.
Yes.
But I think when we say that all women in one area are being oppressed or being liberated, that's also a problem. So we have to look at it case by case and really just speak truth to power and make sure that we're listening to people on the ground.
Absolutely.
Well, one final question, then we got to go. You obviously run Students for Liberty, and I'm curious what you think of the protests in Berkeley. Whenever a conservative speaker wants to come there, it's costing hundreds of thousands of dollars just to protect that speaker, like a Ben Shapiro, for instance, who isn't really a provocative guy, right? He's conservative, but he's not a fire thrower. It just seems like it's economically unfeasible for these sort of protests to continue whenever a conservative speaker comes on campus. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing this a lot, and even we have hundreds and thousands of students in the United States and all around the world, and they are facing that. Our students got detained by campus police because they handed out the Constitution of the United States of America.
It's ridiculous.
That is ridiculous. And there is a lot of ostracism of more libertarian conservative thinkers on campus or students, and that it's not really a good environment to exchange ideas as we do here in a civil way. And I wish that we would going in that way. However, one has to also realize many of the protests that you see that also turn violent coming from the outside, not necessarily from the student body.
Like an Antifa, for instance.
Exactly. Because they love doing this sort of thing, they get a kick out of it, right? And students then just latch onto that. Like with the 1960s, it's about like sex and drugs, and people just jump on it, you know. And it's a complicated phenomenon, but I think we need to better understand where these ideas come from. And at the moment, the right always says like, oh, like free speech, they have to embrace that, but they don't understand where the ideas come from. And thinkers like Marcuse, who made the argument that free speech is actually antithetical to like a free society and an equal society. I mean, he has to get a better understanding of that.
And before we go, I did take 1 semester of German at Maryland, so I'm going to try out something with you.
All right.
Ich glaube, das gute Bier hilft mir als alle Seite Afterwelt. What did I just say?
You're just bragging, Joe.
No, that's the only literal German I know besides B. Gates.
It sounded like coming from a Second World War movie, yeah?
Oh, God. Yeah, I watched James. I watched Raiders of the Lost Ark.
It was something about beer, so I applaud you for that.
All right. I'm just trying to end it on a joke.
Joe,
They say to do that.
Dr. Wolf von Laer and Blair Armani,
Auf
thank you for
Wiedersehen.
being civil, for liberal, and conservative. We can all talk to each other. That's what the show is all about.
Auf Wiedersehen. Yes. A little more German than I thought. Go ahead.
Okay.